Good afternoon, my name's Mel and welcome to my YouTube channel where we'll be talking about all things that interest me about books, reading and authors. This is the first video that I'm making for this channel. I've never made a YouTube video before, to be honest, in my entire life, so I don't particularly know exactly what I'm doing, but maybe that's all part of the fun of it, is learning as we go along. I thought that it was the right time to make this channel. I read a lot of books. I've always read a lot of books since I was a child. I was the kid in school that was reading like 6 books a week. And I read through the library at school and had to then go to the big school and read in the library in there. And I'd read everything in the village library that we had, and I was just really hungry for books. I think I went through a period in my 20s where I sort of probably stopped reading a little bit, although a lot of that I think was to do with studying at university. You start to read in a different way when you're studying at university because you have to skim read a lot of books to get a lot of the information, and then that kind of transposes itself into like when you try to read for pleasure and you end up like skimming a page and you've got to the bottom of it, you don't really know what happened in the middle and you just keep having to go back. So I think I had to be out of university for a couple of years to forget about doing that so I could actually begin to read properly and start at the top of the page, get to the bottom and then truly understand, exactly what had been said. But anyway, once I got over that, I got back into reading a couple of years ago again and I've been having a great time ever since. This year alone, I'm on my 96th book that's not including audiobooks. I'm not sure how many audiobooks I've listened to, but I know I've listened to quite a few. I'll probably make a list of them at the end of the year. But physically, I'm currently on my 96th book. So my goal was 100 books at the beginning of the year, so it looks like I'm definitely going to do that. And I've been doing like a challenge where I have to, read a book from romance genre, read a book from the sci-fi genre, read a book that's set on the East Coast, read a book that's set on the West Coast. And that's been going pretty well actually. I've been challenged into reading some books that I probably wouldn't have done just to hit the point on the list. But that's like all the fun of reading. I'm also in a physical book group that I attend every month. And again, one of the reasons why I joined that was to try and get out of my comfort zone and be exposed to some books that I probably wouldn't choose to read by myself. So I'm doing that and I really enjoy it. But those discussions are limited to really talking about the book that we voted on that we're talking about for that month at book club. And those books that we vote in are limited to 400 pages. And for some reason, all the books that I seem to like are over 400 pages long. And some of them are just over like 412 pages or something ridiculous like that. But it means that I can't put them forward for the book club. So I don't really feel like I have an outlet to talk to people necessarily about all the things that I like to read. I have quite a varied interest in different genres. So I know people who read, so I've got friends who like reading, but maybe they like one particular genre that they sort of read in. So I never really have like one person that I can sit and talk about a book completely, like a whole week's worth of reading where I might read 2 or 3 books and they're from 2 or 3 different genres. So my poor boyfriend, he normally gets a good discussion about this after he puts the light out to go to sleep, and I'm sitting there going, well, I think you should read this book and I don't think you should read this book. These are the reasons why. And quite frankly, he was never going to read those books anyway because he actually prefers non-fiction, whereas I like fiction. So that's one of the reasons why I've started this channel, really, just so that I can find more people to talk about my hobby with. Because, although reading is a solitary hobby, I don't think that means that you don't like to then talk about it with other people. I'm also a runner. That's a fairly solitary hobby as well. But you go to races and then you enjoy running with other people, and quite frankly, all runners love talking about running. So if we have the opportunity to talk to another runner about running when we're at a social event, we will do that, like until people shut us up. So hopefully I can be passionate about all the books that I've read, the ones that I like, the ones that I don't like, and I can use this channel as an outlet to do that. So I'd say at the moment I'm in my Stephen King era. I discovered Stephen King in about March time, and so far I think I've read about 25 of his novels so far this year. Absolute massive fan. I wish that I had got into him a few years earlier. Actually, one of the reasons why I didn't was there was a line in a book, like I actually did buy a book probably about 20 years ago, and there was a line in this book that was talking about beating a dog to death, like on the first or the second page, and I was just like, right, I'm out. Shut the book. I can't even remember which one it was. You know, and it just sort of put me off ever picking up one of his books again. But then in March time, you know, I decided to give him a go. And I actually picked up Elevation, which was a novella, and thought that's kind of quirky. I quite liked that. So then picked up a couple more, and then I've been having an absolutely great time since. And I've also discovered John Mars this year, so I've been working my way through his books as well. I really, really enjoy his style of writing. And in a way, I use his books as a treat, so I could just sit and read them all back to back if I'm honest, but I don't. When I know that I'm going to have undisturbed like 3 or 4 hours worth of reading in a day because people are busy and I'm not, then I'll save a John Mars for then when I can get deeply invested in the book and not get disturbed. I'm sure we all have writers that we love that we like to, you know, do that with. So if I talk a little bit about the genres that I like, as I said, I'm quite varied with the genres that I like. I really like thrillers. I really enjoy historical fiction. I'm really into dystopian novels as well. Like really, I'm sort of getting into those quite a lot this year. I like literary fiction. I like a little bit of fantasy, but not really the kind of fantasy where you've got fairies and that kind of thing. More like I quite like the sort of fantasy that Jasper Fforde writes, which is kind of like a bit comedic and jokey. But I did really enjoy watching Game of Thrones. I haven't actually read it myself, but I did enjoy watching it, and I would like to read that at some point. So I think that that's probably a little bit different from maybe the ACOTAR series and stuff, because I really don't think ACOTAR is really like the kind of thing that I'm sort of going to be into. And I also like the occasional rom-com. Not massively, but when I first sort of got back into reading, that was kind of like where I was at, sort of reading like Lindsay Kelk, those kind of authors. And I've sort of like gone off that a little bit now and gone into a lot of other genres. But I do really like one every so often. I do enjoy one every so often, so you know, I say I've got quite a broad range of things that I like to read. So hopefully we can have some varied discussions about things. I suppose it would be pertinent to say what my favourite books have been this year, because you know I'm telling you that I've read like 96 books this year, but actually, what constitutes the best out of all those that I've read so far? So I would say that top of the list for me has been Christine by Stephen King. That book was absolutely outstanding, and I have to admit when I came into that one I thought, am I really going to enjoy a book about a car? You know, and I was sort of expecting to give it a mid rating, you know, because I enjoy Stephen King, but that doesn't mean like I rate them all as a 5-star read. I gave Christine 6 stars out of 5. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I have a Christine fidget toy on my desk. So thank you, Stephen King, for Christine. Second book that I would say was also 5-6-star read, if you like, this year was Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. Now, Mr. Mercedes starts the Holly Gibney series in Stephen King, which originally he wasn't meant to be writing a series on Holly Gibney, but it just sort of happened. And Mr. Mercedes is the first book in that series. And I have to admit, I read that book and I devoured End of Watch, Finders Keepers. And then in If It Bleeds, there is a short story dedicated to Holly Gibney in there, which I've read, and I'm about to start the actual book dedicated to Holly called Holly. Haven't read that yet, so please don't tell me any more about it. Which I'm reading all that in preparation for Never Flinch, because I believe Never Flinch is also following the Holly character. But I actually really, really enjoy her, although I do admit that I've heard there's a bit of a love-hate relationship with Stephen King's readers regarding Holly. Some absolutely loathe her, really wish Stephen King could stop writing about her, and others absolutely love her. So far, I absolutely love her. I think she's great. And I think that when he decided to get into the thriller genre, which is basically what Mr. Mercedes is about, I was like, Stephen King, you have found yourself in this book. I mean, don't get me wrong, Stephen King he's a very varied author, and he can write lots of different kinds of books. but he lent particularly well to thriller crime, I think. So the more he does of that, the happier I am. But it's not all about Stephen King, even though I'm in my Stephen King era. I would say that other 5-star reads this year for me, or 6-star should we say, would be Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. Wow, that was some book. And that was the first sort of 6-star read that I had this year at the beginning of the year. I'd seen the book quite hyped up and seen that it had the Pulitzer Prize and the Women's Prize for Fiction. So I was sort of interested in it. I'd sort of read the premise of it. And then I received a copy for my birthday. So there was like nothing stopping me really then from reading it. And I was just hooked. You know, I mean, it's quite a big book really. And I got through it fairly quickly because I just was so invested in Demon as a character, and also the characters around him, you know, in his life. I really, really recommend that book. And then finally is a book that I've read most recently called The Matchbox Girl by Alice Jolly. So I appreciate that actually this book is not on sale to the general public until November time, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But I have a subscription with Goldsborough Books, and they gave us our copies earlier this month in September, and I devoured mine in about 3 or 4 days. And don't necessarily take everything that you read in the reviews about this book as like a foregone conclusion that you won't enjoy this book, because I think there were about 3 or 4 reviews that existed when I first started reading this book, and I have to admit I actually went to the reviews on Goodreads because after about 10 to 20 pages the language is a little bit difficult to get on with in this book to begin with. You're sort of in the head of the main character and you sort of like, this doesn't make sense, and why is the author writing like this, and can I really cope with this for like 400 pages, you know? And I was sort of thinking like, what's going on? And I didn't really find the answer to what was going on, to be honest, in Goodreads, but I did find some reviews which were sort of quite critical. It looked like some people had actually given up fairly early on in the book. But I decided, you know, I'd liked the premise when I'd read it, so I was going to like carry on with it. And actually when I'd sort of worked out what the language was meant to mean to the main character and why she was speaking like that inside her own head, once I deciphered that, I've got to be honest, and it was fairly easy to read the rest of the book. It was a really outstanding book, and all I can say is, Alice Jolly, thank you so much for writing this book. It was really poignant, really made me think. It's historical fiction about Dr. Asperger and the main character's time that she spends as a child with Dr. Asperger, like under his care and around him. And I just thought it was a really moving book as well, really outstanding. So if you get the opportunity to buy this book in November, I recommend it. And then I also said that I'd listened to quite a few audiobooks this year, so I'm sorry that I don't know how many that I've listened to be honest. I don't really count. I tend to listen to them when I go out running, so I don't tend to listen to them in the car or anything like that. I just like to sort of listen to it when I go for a run, so I've got something a little bit different from music to listen to. But outstanding books there that I've listened to was All the Colours of the Dark by Chris Whittaker. I was probably listening to that book for about 5 weeks, and I was just raving about it to anybody that would listen. And I'd never really heard of Chris Whittaker before. I've never read any of his books before, so after I'd listened to All the Colours of the Dark, I went out and bought another 3 books, like in a set, by Chris Whittaker, which I'm really looking forward to getting to read some more of his work, because I really did enjoy All the Colours of the Dark so much. And then the other one that I would really recommend is one that I'm currently listening to. I'm about 2.5 hours from the end now, so don't say anything that's going to spoil it for me. But I'm listening to Triflers Need Not Apply by Camilla Bruce, and it is shocking. So this book is historical fiction, and the main character is based on a woman who actually was a female serial killer at the turn of the century in America, and she's absolutely vicious, so violent, and I think that the author's done a really good job of weaving a fictional narrative around, you know, some obviously factual events that happened, and it's making me want to look at her back catalogue too and start to read her, because I'm just really, really enjoying this book. Never heard of Camilla Bruce before, never heard of this serial killer before, or this book before. I mean, I've not seen it hyped up anywhere, but it's a gem. So at the moment, I'm reading 2 books, so we'll just tell you about those before we end the video. I'm currently reading The Fall of the House at Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. I've actually been reading this for a couple of months, so I always seem to have this on the go, and I just dip in and read, a story here or there, because this is full of a lot of short stories. I originally bought the book because I had watched The Fall of the House at Usher on Netflix and thought it was absolutely outstanding TV show, and then was quite disappointed to discover that the short story is a mere 20 pages long, if that, and it's not. I'd say Netflix is very loosely based on the Fall of the House at Usher story by Edgar Allan Poe, so Netflix did a really, really good job on that series, and I actually did enjoy the series more than the Edgar Allan Poe story. However, there's obviously a lot of stories in here, like short stories, and some of them are like really, really interesting. The other thing that I really like reading about this book is it's quite a challenging book to read. I actually have to get the dictionary out a fair bit. The guy, he writes in Latin a fair bit. He writes in French, and he also, uses words in English that, quite frankly, we don't really use very often anymore. So it's an educational experience, but yeah, I'm enjoying it. And then the other book that I'm currently reading is Bournville by Jonathan Coe. Now, this is not a book that I would have picked up by myself. It was voted in by my book group as the September read. I'm not really sure how I feel about it at the moment. I'm only about 60 or 70 pages in. He seems to be writing fairly well. I can't find any problems with his style or anything like that at the moment. My only concern, I think, with this book is that here in the UK, if anybody discusses COVID-19 or Brexit, it's guaranteed that you're going to dislike your friends after you've had that conversation. Everybody is quite polarised in their opinion on these 2 subjects. So it's sort of polite, really, just not to talk about it, so we can just sort of get on with our lives and move past those events. So I'm not really sure how I feel about a book which is essentially talking in depth about those 2 events and then discussing it with my book group, because I actually quite like the people in my book group. So I'm a little bit worried, I have to admit, to get through this book and then have to discuss that with a group of people who I sort of get on with. But, books should be there to challenge us as well, so we'll see how that goes. But that's currently my reading situation at the moment. A little bit about my reading journey this year. So hopefully you'll want to come back and we'll have some more discussions about things I like about books, and probably, as I say, I'll do a proper review on this, but I might wait until November time when people can actually get hold of the book, because I don't want to end up spoiling it for people before they've read the book. So, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.